Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our ASTA Power Project Subcontractor Focus presentation this morning, our webinar. We're excited to have everyone. We've got a few people kind of popping in now and then, so but I think it's about time for us to get started. A few housekeeping issues with GoToMeeting. Everyone, all the attendees are muted. Just to keep the general noise down. I think most people are happy about that we auto mute. You also will be able to, however, provide questions via the panel to your right. You can enter them via chat and just send them into us, or via the questions tab. So you'll see both of those in the GoToMeeting piece. We plan the presentation to last about 45-50 minutes. We generally try to leave some time for questions, but because I tend to babble on, sometimes we don't have time. If we don't have time and you do ask a question, we'll be happy to answer them via email after the fact. So don't worry, if we run out of time, we will get your questions answered. So today, our focus is on subcontractors. And I have to tell you that I'm really excited to have today Megan DePody with me. So Megan is a 10-year veteran of the contractor space. She is a recent addition to the Alicosoft ASTA Power Project US team. That was a mouthful. And Megan has spent most of her time in the scheduling space. She's worked as a scheduler, project manager. She has an undergraduate in construction management, but she spent 10 years out living this. She's worked with all the major scheduling tools, all the various variations of Oracle that you may run into. Still some SureTrack folks out there, P3, P6. Also has experience with Microsoft Project. And I think probably the ubiquitous communication tool out there, Excel, that a lot of people still use for just about every kind of possible tool, as every possible tool out there. So, but she also has practical experience interacting the business needs, managing resources. She worked at subcontractors. In the last several years, has worked for GCs as well. So she's seen kind of both sides of that fence. My name is Jim Dawkins. I'm the U.S. channel manager. We work through channel partners in the U.S. We have 10 channel partners across the U.S. that are local to you and can provide you with the support and training you need to get up to speed on ASTA Power Project. Now, before we jump into the presentation specifics, the kind of the meat of our presentation, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, very briefly, to address what is this ASTA Power Project? Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. Who's using it? Always a question I get asked. And beyond that, tell me a little bit about the company behind the software. So why are people adopting this? So to answer the first question, who uses ASTA Power Project? I have to tell you that increasingly folks are continue to tell me that ASTA Power Project seems to be the best kept scheduling secret in the US. That's despite the fact that we have really rapid growing adoption, over 1,000 users in the US today. And you can see we've got small and large contractors. We've got subcontractors, we've got general contractors. So clearly the next question might be, great, you've got growing adoption. Why are people moving? Well, increasingly folks are telling us that they're looking for a better scheduling tool. So yet that certainly begs to dig just a little bit deeper. What do you mean, a better scheduling tool? Well, folks are indicating to us that they feel like they're spending too much of their training budget retraining folks on complicated tools. Does it do this vast array of possibilities, the current scheduling tools they're using? Some of them do. And some of them are far too complex for a field superintendent or for a casual scheduling user to use. Full-time schedulers, great, but even those folks may need to be retrained or may not be using all the capabilities. So it's just a little bit too hard to use. They also discover that the method of licensing is a bit onerous. Everybody's got to have a full copy when, as I said, some are casual users. And finally, there are other folks who say that the scheduling tool they're using might be relatively easy, but just doesn't go far enough. There seems to be this gap in the middle. I've got super complex, very simple, and I want something I can grow with that's easy to license, is appropriately licensed based on the way I use it, but I also don't have to retrain on frequently. So that's the fundamental of why. So let's look at a couple of companies real quick, and that will help guide our presentation today. I'll start with the GC, Saunders, here locally in Denver. Megan and I are located in the U.S. headquarters for Alicosoft in Denver, Colorado. Got a lovely snow going on outside. And Saunders is here as well. You can see that their comments are really around ease of use and cost effectiveness. So, I think there's a lot of software tools today that talk about ease of use. So the proof is in the actual application. That's what we'll show you today. So you'll get to see, okay, great, everybody says it's easy to use. Help me understand exactly how that manifests itself. Encore Electric is a local electrical firm that also is an adopter of Ask to Power Project. And for them, they were moving from a very construction-specific tool that lots of folks are apparently still using out there, SureTrack. They really enjoyed the fact that SureTrack was clearly focused, but they also felt a little limited. That didn't mean that they wanted to move all the way up to P6. They also understood that the expense of moving to P6 for a subcontractor was quite substantial with the number of casual users. And finally, an area that we're going to specifically address today, they called out the fact that managing resources was just really critical for them. And subcontractors will often get pushed into the position of being the benefactor of a compressed schedule. So real quick note, people ask about how we live in the scheduling ecosystem. There are reasons folks are using other dominant scheduling tools. Some of them are because of functionality. That's terrific. You find the tool that best fits your needs. Some of them are being mandated. Sometimes the owner specifies, or the core, or somebody specifies a tool. That's okay. You can schedule an Ask to Power project and save it in the file format that they need. If they need an XER file format, terrific. You can provide that to them. You can still use the tool you want. So in some ways you can kind of get your cake and eat it too. This certainly speaks to two important pieces: the ability to create schedules rapidly, quickly, easily for casual users, but also communicate effectively, not have to spend a great deal of time formatting the specific presentation that you provide to the contractor. I'm going to pop through these quickly. Many people are surprised to find out that Ask to Power Project is not a new tool. The scheduling tool has been around since 1988. It's been around as long as something you may have heard of called Primavera. Over 90% of the contractors in the UK, the large contractors, use it, but we now have over 1,100 users in the US. We just had a user conference in Denver, and we had over 100 users travel to come see the best practices with Ask to Power Project. It's used all over the world, and the reason is because of good local support, and our developers listen to your feedback. What do we need to add? With that, let me intro just a little bit to what before I hand it off to Megan, what Megan's going to talk about. It's important to ask yourself, are you, as a subcontractor, scheduling every job? And do you further resource load every job? Resources are just so critical for your teams. And if you do, why? Perhaps the corollary, why not, is important as well. If you're not doing it, why or why not? Well, for a lot of folks, it's not only why, but it's when do you schedule? So is that after the durations have been provided to you by the GC? Do you do it at proposal stage in great detail, but then get a very summarized detail from the GC? So you have to ask yourself why. It is important that you can employ scheduling to be used as a tool to minimize your cost, not just as a tool to demonstrate when we're going to get done, and also a tool that allows you to work with cooperatively, not just for a GC or an owner. Yes, it does help you defend when you're put in the awkward position of delay compression and you're the one that gets to be compressed. It also, of course, often is used for defense against some claims. It is important for you to schedule as soon as you possibly can, and we're going to talk about that. So with that kind of teasers just a little bit, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Megan. Megan's going to jump right into the tool and help you see some of what we're talking about here. Megan, I can see your screen great.
Fantastic. All right, thanks, Jim. So I'm going to show you what I found working for a subcontractor is really helpful in a way that you can kind of control your own destiny as far as the construction schedule is concerned, and rather than being driven by what your GC thinks that you should be able to do. So right here, I've got a schedule given to me by a general contractor. Like Jim said, the good thing about ASTA is it doesn't matter what scheduling software the general contractor uses. You can directly open that up into ASTA. There's no importing, exporting. So if they send you a Microsoft project file or SureTrack files or P6 files, P3, anything, you can just directly open that up. It will open up in ASTA and look just like this. You can also, if you're sending the information back to them, send it in that same file format and send it back to them. As you probably know, get various levels of details from the general contractor. So the first and foremost important thing to do that I found is to take a look at the general contractor schedule, determine how much detail is there and what you need to add in to make this schedule work for you and help you plan your work most effectively. So, like I said, we've got a general contractor schedule here. It's a pretty basic, general construction schedule. We've got various areas. I'm going to focus today on MEP. That's an area where a lot of times general contractor schedules are lacking, usually due to the fact that they don't necessarily understand all of the parts and pieces involved in the MEP systems, so they a lot of times just get grouped together. This one here is not too bad. They've got it separated, ceiling rough versus wall rough. If you expand here, they also have it grouped out by floor for each of these areas. I'm going to drill down here and look just at electrical, or just at ceiling rough rather. We're going to pretend that we're electrical contractor. That's where our focus is going to be today. So taking a look at this, we're going to look and say, okay, these are the activities the general contractor has for us. Are these durations doable? Can we do our work within these durations that they've given us? And if not, how do we prove to them why not? So the most important thing about this is doing it quickly. If you wait, if they give you the schedule and it's a month later before you get back to them, it's too late and you've missed your window of opportunity to get that information incorporated into the schedule, potentially get any changes made, get your durations changed, things like that. So one of the great things here is that it is very quick and easy to add activities into ASTA. If you have your activities in Excel. A lot of times you'll get a list like this from your foreman, your superintendent, whoever's planning out your project. You can merely directly copy and paste it right into ASTA. You can then add your relationships, link all these activities together. Say this is the ground floor. We can link it to the ground floor there. Schedule it and take a look. So right now I have, this is my sequence of activities. It looks too long. And that's one way to do it that can still be a little cumbersome. Another way you can do it that I think is the most effective, especially for things like this where you have a lot of repetition, is ASTA has something called a task pool, which the closest correlation that I can think of is Fragnets in P3, or P6 doesn't really have anything like this. But what it is it's a group of activities. You can just directly drag and drop them over, and within that set of activities, it contains, you can have resources in there, you can have activity codes, different calendars, all your relationships and logic, whatever you want to have that copies over every time is there. So you're not starting from scratch with every group of activities that you're creating. So I'm going to say, okay, this is I've got my ceiling rough on the ground floor. These are my steps that actually are in the ceiling rough, that we've got mains, feeders, and some telecom. Schedule that out. When we look at it, that's 11 days as we have it. Well, our general contractor only gave us 8 days. So how do we show that, rather than just taking this to the general contractor and saying, hey, we need 11 days, and they'll say, yeah, so what? You have 8, make it work. So how we can prove that we do in fact need 11 days is by resource loading and showing these are the hours and crews we had planned on, and this is why either it is or is not. You might discover that, with a little tweaking, we can make it work within those 8 days. Maybe you don't need to wait till the mains are completely done before we start our feeders, that it's going to be a separate crew and we can overlap those activities a little bit, or we can reduce some of these durations. But either way, getting the resources in there quickly and efficiently can help you make your point one way or the other within a short time frame, so that you can hopefully get your information included into the general contractor schedule and incorporate it in there, rather than having to just stick with and be held to the activities that they created for you. So I'm going to show you, this is really quick and easy to do. You could even do it, call a meeting with your general contractor, sit down and say, hey, I want to show you why we have some problems with the schedule, and show them in a pretty quick and easy way, or do it yourself, send it over, either way. So the first thing we need to do is get our resources in there. I've got a view that I use to assign my resources. It's showing the whole schedule. Again, I'm going to just jump down and look just at our ceiling rough-in. Rather than put my manpower into their activity that they created, I'm going to load it into the activities that I have. It's going to be an electrician doing all of these activities. So I'm going to say, maybe we have 200 hours for the mains, 300 hours for the feeders, and 50 hours for the telecom. So we have 550 hours for this. Well, that's great, but that still doesn't tell me a whole lot. A couple of things you can do here. First of all, if you open up the resource, if you go here, it lists, it shows that you have an electrician on each of those for those designated hours. If I open that up, you can look and see how it is calculating what it calculates. Right now I have it set that I put in my effort, which is P6, or which is ASTA speak rather, for what is man hours in P6, and my duration, and it is then going to calculate my allocation, which is my number of people. By doing that, I'm having it calculate my crew size. I know the number of hours I had in my estimate. I know my rough idea of what I think the duration should be, and it's going to calculate out the people. If I change this calculated parameter here to, say, duration, if in my estimate I had a total number of hours and my desired crew size, I could put those two pieces of information in and have it determine my duration that I need. That's a good way to do it if you are doing your initial schedule from the get-go, you know, rather than I brought the task pool over, but if I didn't necessarily have a task pool created or my task pool had durations that I knew were not correct, I could use this by putting in my total number of hours and say, hey, we would like to have, you know, 5-man crews on this job. So you can put those hours, that information in, and it will calculate the duration for you. Again, you can do the same thing with have it calculate your hours. If you knew how many days and how many people, it will do the math for your hours. This balancing parameter here is just what changes if you make changes to your activity. So right now I have allocation is changing. So if you grab an activity here, you can see in this box that pops up, it's saying I have 200 hours, so my allocation is 5 people. If I shrink this down, my number of people is changing. That I still have 200 hours to do, but I try and have to do it in 2 days, then I need 12 and a half, so 13 people. Whereas if I go longer, my crew size can change. And again, if I were to change that to effort and drag this, it's keeping my crew size at 5 people, but is saying that your number of hours changes based on the duration. So that is very helpful, like I said, in the creation of your activities. If you don't know what durations you need, you can plug in your hours and crew size and have it tell you what those durations need to be. So now that we've got this, again, how do we show to our general contractor that, hey, we need more time? Just having number of hours in there doesn't really show us much. So if we go back to our schedule here, look at it a couple ways. Up here you can see that those are our resources, you know, from the last view. They're still assigned there. But we can create what's called a histogram. And that is basically just a graph or a chart that visually shows what our man hours are. Or what I have it right now is going to show what our allocation is, what our number of people. Because that is the easiest for people to understand. So I can select what resource I want to look at. I'm going to do what's called a stacked histogram, which if I had multiple resources here, it would just stack them in different colors. So right now, the way I have it scheduled, this is my resource. You know, at the peak here, I've got 9.38 people. That's great. That says, you know what, this is probably doable. If we shrink this to try and get within the general contractor's 8 days and say, okay, to do that, we're gonna scoot this down, reschedule it. We're still at 10 days. Let's maybe cut this one back a little bit. Okay, we've reached the 8 days that we need to for the general contractor. Well, that went up to make it work this way, we need 19 people. And maybe that's doable, or maybe if we undo this, in ASTI you can undo almost anything, so that is great. That maybe that doesn't work, but maybe instead we can, you know, change this relationship and have a lag in there. Overlap those activities a little bit. So now we're still at the 8 days. Instead of 19, now we need 15. So maybe that is doable. Or you can say, you know what, this first floor is a small room. We really can't fit more than 10 people in there. So this is where you could come to the general contractor and say, look, you know, in order to make it in those 8 days, we would need at least 14, 15 people, and physically it's just impossible to get that many in the room. Or, you know, maybe resources are short, you can't do it. You can say, hey, can we work with you? Can we figure something out and somehow still keep it at that 11 days? So that's how you can use this information to help drive the schedule, control your destiny, and bring things back to where you want them to be. As you can see, again, this information, everything updates live. So as I change this, my chart here, my histogram went back showing the 9 people. So it's real easy. You know, when you have a lot going on, your resource curve is going to have a lot of kind of peaks and valleys, ups and downs. By seeing it visually, it can help to try and even those out so that you're not having to go from 5 people to 10 people back down to 3 all within a week or 2 time period. When you have a lot of activities loaded, it's easier than just with 3, but you can play around with your relationships and your crews and whatnot to try and level that out as much as possible so you're doing gradual increases and decreases rather than jumping around. So by handing your general contractor this resource curve, it's a real quick, easy, visual way to show them what you need and why you need it to be incorporated in their schedule. So now let's say, okay, great. The general contractor hopefully incorporated this into the schedule. If not, even if they didn't and are still holding you to this one activity is all they're tracking, you can still track all of your detail within your own version of their schedule. So now what do we do when project finally starts and we're delayed? Never happens, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a baseline here so that we have something to compare it to. Make that my current baseline. So now I need to update this schedule. We got an update from the general contractor. So we need to set a progress period, which is the equivalent of a data date. Same thing. So we started on January 1st. So we'll say this is 1/31. End of the month update. Set that as progress entry period. Again, that makes it the data date, makes it the current date you're reporting against. So I'm going to update this schedule and say that some of this pre-construction stuff actually started late. So this didn't start until the 25th. We'll come down and say these are our early site activities. You know, maybe we didn't get permits in time. With all of these, you can drop down or type in information. So our project is delayed. So now if we come back to just looking at our MEP as we had, I can turn on and compare it to my baseline. So, okay, things shifted quite a bit. So what does the general contractor do? Usually, they condense your work and say, okay, you had 8 days. Well, now they're only going to give you 4. Because it's early in the project and we think you're going to just be able to find a way to make that work. So, how do we prove to them that there is no way that we can get our work done in 4 days? Well, we can go back to looking at our resources. So if we turn our histogram back on, you know, it's still showing our same resource curve, it's just shifted in the dates. But now we say, okay, we need to somehow make this 11 days that we had still planned on doing down to 4 days. So that's going to be a lot of shifting of activities. So first thing we'll do is turn these into lagged activities. Say every day we're just starting to do it. We're going to 1 day lag on all of this. That's great. We still only have 5 days, so we still need to shift this down, and we need some time after the feeders. We need to make sure we're done before, or our mains rather are done before our feeders. We're still at 5 days. We need to cut this down. There we go. We finally hit 4 days. Well, that's great. But now at our peak, we need 31 people. We had said at the beginning it was physically impossible to get 14 in this one area. So how the heck are we going to get 30? It's just not possible. The great thing we can do here is show it visually as well. If we open up the properties for this histogram, we can look and add in whatever else we want to graph. You can graph, show you here, there's a whole big list of things you want to graph, whether it's resources, costs, etc. So I'm going to, again, do my allocation, which is my number of people, but instead of showing my live data, I'm going to show it from my baseline. We'll change the color here so that we can differentiate. You can, when you're doing histograms, you can do filters or just time periods, however, so you can make this look however you want. There's a lot of options. You can also very easily export it to Excel. So if you are more comfortable with the charts and graphs in Excel, you can do that and manipulate it. It imports the data as well onto one sheet and the chart onto another, so you can manipulate it, make it look however you want. But this is very easy. Ask to always print whatever your screen is. So it's just a few clicks like that. I have this that I can easily print out and hand to my general contractor and say, look, we were contracted to this manpower curve. To, 5 people, this is looking at by week. 5 people 1 week, up to 9. This is what we had planned on. This is what we're contracted to. You are now asking us for this. That is a pretty stark difference and something that is very visually easy for them to understand and say, okay, now we kind of get it. There's no way, you're getting 32 people in that area. So what else can we do to still overcome this delay that we have without holding you to this? Because at this point, this is when you say, okay, maybe we can get it done in those 4 hours, but maybe we have to work overtime. Maybe we have to work multiple shifts, which again includes added cost. It's not free to switch from a standard 5-day, 8-hour work week to either having multiple shifts, having overtime, however it is you can make it work. You can show all those different scenarios even on one graph for them and say, these are our options. These are the costs associated with those options. What would you like us to do? How, we would still like to help you make your schedule, help you overcome this delay. We just can't do it by merely shrinking our stuff to 4 days. Or we can, but it's going to cost extra. And here's why. Here's where our costs come from. So as you can see, it's a really quick, easy way to visually show and present something that backs you up and says, look, this is what we need for our schedule. This is why we need it. When changes come in, you can, again, add costs to this. You can show you can have as many baselines as you want. So you can have multiple baselines that all show, or, even if you can call it a baseline, but really it's going to be kind of what if scenarios that you could show. Here's what we were contracted to. Here's what happens if we work maybe 5 10s. Here's what's working if we work a 6-day work week or a 7-day work week or shift work. And you can have them all here, in different colors and say, these are the options with your durations, with our crew sizes, and then you can provide them with your cost scenarios for each of those. And you can do it in a quick way so that there's a quick turnaround, that they hand you the schedule with a delay, and within a day, you can return to them and say, hey, these are the issues we have. How can we as a team work through this and make it work for all of us? So that is what I have at the moment for what we've got going on. I don't know if there are any questions, or Jim, if you have anything to add.
Thanks, Megan. Let me pop back over. I'm gonna grab the presentation. Well, actually, I'm gonna leave you as the presenter, perhaps, some of these questions you could show. So there's a couple of questions about functionality and a couple that seem more about just what you've seen in experience with a subcontractor. The first question is, how often do you see or did you receive, rather, a schedule from a GC, and what did it look like? I assume they mean like what level of detail or in what format, something along those lines.
Yeah, no, that's good. In general, we would get some kind of schedule most of the time at the beginning of a job. The level of detail varied greatly. There are a lot of schedules we would get that would just say MEP rough, 20 days. Sometimes it wouldn't even break it out by floor, or sometimes it would even just be interior finishes, and included in that somewhere is our rough-in. But it's also framing and drywall and paint and everything else, and they're just saying, 60 days for all your interior rough. That at the very beginning of a project, that's all they know. Well, that's a great opportunity as a subcontractor to jump in, put your level of detail in. Like I said, you can have it calculate the durations based on the hours that you have in your estimate and hand it back to them and say, these are the hours we estimated. This is it. Because we had no frame of reference for how long you wanted us to take it, you can set your durations essentially and send them to the general contractor. And it covers two bases. It covers you and gets you kind of in the driver's seat controlling your destiny, and it helps the general contractor out because they're probably struggling to create a schedule, don't have a lot of time, and you just created a part of the schedule for them. That they're more likely to just take your information and incorporate it when creating the schedule rather than just telling you what they think you should be able to do.
Okay, so it felt like they were receptive, open, and in some cases grateful to get that level of detail.
In general, as long as it was done early and not, a month after they give the schedule to you, because at that point they've probably already put their detail in, possibly even given that detail to the owner, and you've kind of missed your window.
Yep, it's a great point. And the challenge there is to find the time, to have someone who knows how to use the tool, and to be able to respond quickly. The responsiveness is just really, there's a window of opportunity here, right?
Yep.
So the other, that's great. The other question was more about practically how you have this presentation / conversation. So the question is, did you or a PM sit down with the software and the GC? And I assume that the alternative is, or did you just send a piece of paper over a PDF or something?
It varied depending on the job. A lot of times they, trying to get time out of the general contractor doesn't always happen. So then we would present to them our schedule, and usually accompany with a schedule our histogram, our graph, resource graph as kind of backup to show why we came up with what we did and the reasoning behind it. They would usually send, the project manager would usually send that over with a letter of some sort, or bring it to, if they had a scheduling meeting. When possible, if they have scheduling meetings or if we could get the time, we would show it to them in the software, because then you could sit down and you could, if they came up with objections and say, hey, I really don't think we can give you 11 days. How can we make this work? And you could manipulate the schedule while talking to them. Like I said, update that graph live, update the schedule live, and show them. Again, that's great with you can undo up to the last time you opened up that schedule. So you can do a lot of what ifs and kind of play around with different scenarios without really messing up your schedule. You can always go back to where you were. But that was always the most powerful tool and the best way to get them to understand and to get them to buy into your data.
Okay. So the last question is kind of or the last business question is also kind of a functional question as well. There's a few other straight functional questions I've got here, but as the topic is how can we minimize cost? How can we reduce overtime? I assume, so the question says, I assume that there's also cost loading in the tool. So, which is not something we spent a lot of time taking a look at. Could you maybe give us a really brief, really quick taste of how we could look at costs? Because certainly, if we get compression and those hours jump up, some of them may be overtime, so it could get very, very expensive.
Yeah, no problem. You can assign costs to activities the same way you assign resources. You can drag and drop them. You can have them assigned. You can have rates, work rates assigned to your resources so that their cost X dollars, the number of X amount of dollars per hour. In that work rate, you can include things like overtime, that it's, X number of dollars per hour up to 8 hours a day. After that, it's, whatever your overtime rate is. And you can graph those the same way. If we open up the histogram here, you can see there are options for, for total cost, for cash flow, cumulative cost. There are plenty, and you can, as you see, graph costs. You can create what's called cost centers, but that's just, you can call it whatever you want, but you can, create a labor cost, create a material cost. You could create one that's just overtime, that anytime you have something going overtime, you can assign your rate to that. Rate units, you can see there's a whole host of data you can assign to those costs, whether they're linear costs, so it's gonna just assign over the course of that activity, over the duration equally. You could assign it as a curve, so you can front load things or back load things however you want. So you can put any of that information in, and then again, it will graph just as easily as your resources did. You can also, again, export that into Excel or copy. If you can create columns for just about anything. So there are a whole host of columns you can add in there that you can track your actual costs as it come, your planned cost, etc., and import and export that from Excel, copy and paste it rather from Excel to get all of that information in there, and you can graph that even on the same graph as your resources, so it's all in one place.
So you could, as you did with the comparison histogram with resources, you could compare the planned from the GC versus the compressed, delayed schedule, or perhaps just the duration that they gave you versus what you have put together. You could compare the cost and justify a contractual change order.
Exactly.
Excellent. So, and I heard you say it, so I'll call it out. The cut and paste capabilities. A lot of folks kickstart resources and cost, sometimes with schedules. Sometimes, as you mentioned, they'll have a list of tasks given to them in a spreadsheet. One of the things that really differentiates this tool, and it's important to call it out, is that there are tools out there that will import a spreadsheet to start a new project. You can cut and paste, drag and drop as many times on an existing schedule as you want. So you may have a schedule in progress that you decide to cost load, or not in progress, perhaps it's the beginning of a project, and you decide you want to resource load it. It's critical, but all those resources are sitting in a spreadsheet. So long as the columns align appropriately, you just drop it right on here, and we can add all the appropriate resources. We can add all the appropriate costs. It's not difficult and really not uncommon. It's a problem when you're limited by a one-time import. You got to plan ahead. And while some of us may be schedulers, we don't always plan ahead. A couple of other things I'll call out real quickly for Megan is that she made mention of the undo button. It may seem trivial, but especially when you're using a new tool, and you may not be aware of all the capabilities or the ramifications of a certain process, or you just want to do what ifs. There are many tools out there where the undo is limited based on saves. So if you make the mistake of hitting the save button, you can't undo past that save, which makes good logical sense, and we all accept that limitation. That is not the case with Ask to Power Project. We can undo right past that save, so you can what if to your heart's content. It's a great what ifing tool. So
there, yeah, I just saved there, and it still gives me this list of everything. And I like the fact that it gives me a list so that I can go back and say, oh, I just did those 5 things, but I realized I was doing it wrong. You know, where did I mess up? Oh, it was when I started changing the links. Okay.
That's right. And in a scheduling tool, that's critical, because just the backing up, if you're not on the right part of the screen, you may not see what you just undid, and it may be difficult to follow. So one last quick question I'll cover, and I'm going to go ahead and grab back the presentation. So, and make sure you can see, yeah, there we go. So the last question was just about licensing. So we do license it on a named user sitting on a workstation basis or on a concurrent user basis. That is a licensing methodology used widely amongst many large systems, not so much with scheduling software, and it's a darn shame. So that's why we adopted it. You can have the software sit on a server, or you can have the license manager rather sit on the server, and you can install as many copies as you want, and then we just track how many people are concurrently making use of the software. So certainly the software is a full CPM tool, forward and back. We can do full resource cost loadings. One of the things Megan highlighted briefly, in addition to just showing cost, we can show net cash flow. We can show cost and revenue on the same screen. So now that is not something everybody does, but so we're talking about a tool that can go from very easy use all the way up to the ability to grow with you fully cost and resource load. So there are a number of possibilities as you begin to expand into the tool, not all of which you have to take advantage of from day one. A couple of quick notes before we end up, and one last procedural bit based on our invitation. We have another webinar coming on April 28th, and I've actually left the topic for this presentation open. I've gotten some great ideas from previous webinars, from questions people ask. If there's a topic that you are looking to explore a bit, or wonder if we can handle, or just an industry topic, much like we did today, addressing a way to approach scheduling as a subcontractor, love to hear from you. We are doing a webinar with ENR this summer, June 22nd. Look for more information about that coming soon. And then if you'd like to see us live, we'll be at both the spring and fall BIM forums. While we didn't show it, there is a BIM 4D add-on module for Ask to Power Project. So if you've got some VDC folks creating a 3D model using Revit, again, we're agnostic in that regard. We can get the model into the scheduling tool and give you true 4D, create a nice video for you. It's very affordable, just a terrific tool. So we'll be showing that, as well as the base scheduling tool set, in Minneapolis here next month. We'll be in Toronto in June with AACE. So if you're planning to attend that conference, come by and see us. CMAA in the fall in October, and of course, as I mentioned, the same month, the Fall BIM Forum. So lots of opportunities. The last opportunity for you, of course, is that as an attendee for today, you'll receive an email follow-up that takes you to a link for a free 14-day fully functional trial of the software. You can do everything you saw Megan do. You're going to have to hurry because it's only 14 days. But it should give you a nice flavor for how to make use of the tool. Will it meet my needs? You'll see that we work within the ecosystem. You can just open up a P6 file. Megan talked about templates and ways to save settings. That's Those are things all our partners can help you do when you begin to adopt the software. It's very reasonably priced software. So take a look at the trial, have some fun, and see if it might work for you. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. If you'd like more information, you can go to astapowerproject.com, find your local AstaPower project partner. We've got them all over the U.S., as I said, or reach out to us at 855-553-2782. That's our toll-free number. They keep changing the toll-free area codes. That's our toll-free number here in the U.S. Give us a call, talk to myself or Megan, and get your questions answered. So thanks so much for everybody attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.